Homemade comfort food meets convenience food in one simple jar made with love. Or 2, or 3. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back, everyone. If you're new to the channel, one of my passions is helping people learn how to take their shelf-stable food that so many of us store for emergencies and learn how to turn it into delicious home-cooked meals that you're actually going to want to eat. It's definitely important to make sure that you're storing foods that you're going to enjoy eating and that you know how to use when the time comes. I like to do meals in a bag and meals in a jar, and these are 2 ways that you can take your shelf-stable foods and turn them into meals that are ready to go that can help save you a lot of stress in an emergency situation. But they're not only good for emergencies, they can also come in handy for just everyday dinner emergencies. And that also helps keep your food rotated, which is so important. There are 2 different types of meals in a jar that you can do. There's pressure can meals in a jar, and then there's dry ingredient meals in a jar. The kind that I'm doing today are the dry ingredient meals in a jar, so there's no special equipment needed. You don't need a pressure canner or anything like that. They're really very simple and anyone can do them. You just put them together and then you have a shelf-stable meal ready to sit on your shelf. If you seal them properly, they can sit on your shelf for several years. And when it comes time to use them, they're very simple. Just add water. Just take them off the shelf, add water, a very brief cooking time, and you've got a wonderful home-cooked meal. I'm going to be doing 3 different recipes today. They're all 3 chilies, but they're all very different. They're not just slight variations of the same recipe. So you're going to end up with 3 very different new meal in a jar recipes. Let's get started and I will show you how to make the first chili. First things first, we can't talk about chili, or at least I can't talk about chili without talking about Chili O. Now, Chili O is a chili seasoning mix. Chili seasoning is different from just chili powder, which is like a single ingredient seasoning. Now, one of the chilies I'm making today, I do use chili powder and other seasonings to season the chili. But when I make my regular chili, I like to use a seasoning mix. To me, it's just, work harder, not smarter. Oops. To me, it's work smarter, not harder. This has a combination of ingredients. So instead of putting all those individual ingredients in, I just put one thing in. Now, I usually buy my Chili O in a bulk container, kind of like this one. But for a while, Chili O got really hard to find. It was being rebranded as Jerky Chili Pronto, supposedly. But for the longest time, I couldn't find either one of those. So I just bought other things, but now I was able to find Chili O again, and this was the cheapest option at the time per ounce to buy a large box of packets. But now I think I found the bulk seasoning has gone back down in price, so I'll link all that down in the description box. In my opinion, Chili O is the best chili seasoning mix that I've tried. I know I've got my Chili O peeps. Sound off down in the comments. If you know, you know, right? But I'm just going to say, if you don't use Chili O seasoning, I can't really vouch for the quality of your chili, because I really think this seasoning is really great. And you may have to play around with amounts and things like that if you use a different chili seasoning or if you do your own seasoning. Now, you certainly could make your own chili seasoning mix, just like you can make your own taco seasoning or any of those mixes. I will have a video coming up pretty soon on different seasoning mixes that you can home make for your pantry, and I'll include a chili seasoning. Now, chili seasoning mixes, like I mentioned, they contain a bunch of different ingredients. Chili O, it does include flour, which is a thickener, and it does have a little bit of sugar in it, and some people poo-poo it for that reason, but honestly, have they never used flour or cornstarch or anything like that to thicken a dish? And the sugar is just going to be a very small amount, like it's less than 1 gram of added sugars per serving. And sugar is commonly used in tomato-based dishes to counteract the acidity of the tomatoes. So this stuff doesn't bother me at all. We love this seasoning. Now, of course, I do understand if somebody has like celiac disease or diabetes or something like that, where they really, for medical reasons, they do have to avoid foods like that. I totally understand that. That's a whole nother story. Because I did buy the packets last time just for budget's sake, I did take some packets out and put them into a jar. This is just a pint-sized wide mouth mason jar. This just makes it easier if I'm using a lot of it and I'm not using it in one packet amounts. If I'm measuring out different varying amounts, this makes it easier for me because I'm really used to working out of these bulk-sized jars. And this is what I'm going to be using in my first chili recipe. So let's go. The first chili that I'm going to make today is going to be just your basic beef chili, just like a regular chili, but we call this one Wicked Good Chili because it is wicked good chili. And that's kind of a nod to our channel name and to the fact that we're from Maine. We could have just as easily called this freaking awesome chili, but we're calling it Wicked Good Chili. So I'm going to be making this in a wide mouth quart mason jar. For all of these meals in a jar, you really just need really basic equipment. You need your mason jar with the mason jar lid. I use a canning funnel to help get my ingredients into the jar more easily. And then you just need your basic measuring cups and spoons and your ingredients. If you want to store these for longer than, say, about a year on the shelf, then you might want to use oxygen absorbers or a vacuum sealer. But let's get started. The first ingredient in this chili is going to be, of course, Hamburg, ground beef. Now this is freeze-dried ground beef. Freeze-dried foods have a much longer shelf life than dehydrated, so I'm not really comfortable yet. I'm using dehydrated meats in any of my jar recipes. I know I have people who have asked for some recipes with all dehydrated items, and I'm going to be working on some of those. But this is freeze-dried Hamburg. I'm going to use a cup of the Hamburg. And next, I'm going to be using some instant kidney beans. Now, instant beans are beans that have been cooked and dehydrated, so they're going to cook up a lot more quickly than your typical dry bean. Kind of like instant minute rice. Like minute rice is the same thing. It's been cooked and dehydrated, so it cooks up very quickly. You really only need boiling water. You don't even really need to cook it. It'll just absorb the water. Now, you can make your own instant beans if you want. You can cook beans and dehydrate them, or you could even open up a can of canned beans and rinse them, drain them, and dehydrate them. For me personally, I just haven't had the time to do that, so I purchased my dried beans. In fact, I just ordered a 15-pound bag of the instant kidney beans because I've been going through quite a few of them. I had been buying them by the quart jar. So I'll put my favorite sources for instant beans down in the description box in case you would like to purchase them as well. I have gotten all of my instant beans from Mother Earth Products or Thrive Life. Those are the only two companies that I've tried so far. There's another company or two that I do know of that I'll put down there that you can check out, but those are the only ones that I can vouch for because I've used them. So I'm going to use 1.5 cups of the kidney beans. Now you could use any type of bean in this chili that you wanted, but we typically use kidney beans when we make this type of chili, so I'm just trying to stick to my regular recipe that I would typically make if I was making it with all fresh ingredients. So 1.5 cups, that's 1.5 cups. And next I'm going to be using some tomato dices. Now usually I have these in a canister like my other foods, but my canister got empty and I like to wash those in between when I refill them, so that one's in the dishwasher right now. So I'm just using the can. But these are freeze-dried diced tomatoes, and I'm going to use 3/4 cup. So I've got 1/2 cup and then an additional 1/4 cup. Next I'm going to be using a freeze-dried chopped onion, 1/4 cup of the chopped onion. I'm going to be using some tomato powder, and this takes the place of what you would use tomato sauce or tomato paste in the recipe. Now the thing about tomato powder is it can tend to clump, but it is pretty easy to just scrape it back apart and use it, and it will dissolve in your recipe. It's just fine. What I should have done is I should have put this into a mason jar with a mason jar lid when I got it. Any of my ingredients that tend to clump, powders usually, I usually have a lot better luck if I put them in mason jars. Of course, I have a love affair with my canisters, so I've been using my canister for this, but when I have to refill, I think I'll try a mason jar. Now I got this tomato powder from Thrive Life, and they have discontinued their tomato powder for this reason. They had it a long time ago. They discontinued it, I believe, for the same reason. You know, they have people complain that it clumps. But people were begging them to bring it back because everyone loves tomato powder. It's a really, really versatile ingredient in your pantry. It's really an awesome ingredient. So they finally did bring it back, and it's been a little while, and now they're discontinuing it again. So it is on clearance on their website if you need to pick some up. And there are other sources for tomato powder if, you know, it becomes unavailable. But that's where I got this one. And you can make your own tomato powder by dehydrating or freeze drying tomatoes and then powdering them. That's all it is. It's powdered tomatoes. I've seen some people who do it with their skins when they have skins left over from processing tomatoes, but I just can't imagine that just the skins would really give you a really rich tomato flavor like a tomato powder made from the whole tomato. But I've never tried it myself because I leave the skins on when I process my tomatoes. When I make salsa, spaghetti sauce, any of that stuff, I leave them right on. So we're going to be using 1/8 cup of the tomato powder. The next ingredient I'm going to add is going to be these mixed bell peppers. These are dehydrated bell peppers. I got these from Amazon. They're Augustin Farms. There are a lot of dehydrated ingredients in this recipe, and a lot of them could be swapped out. It's not 100% dehydrated, but there's quite a few. I'm going to be using 1/8 cup or 2 tablespoons of this mixed bell pepper. 1/8 cup is equal to 2 tablespoons. Not a lot of measuring cup sets come with 1/8 cup. So I have 2 sets that have 1/8 cup, and I really value those cups because they're pretty handy. But if you don't have one, you can just measure out 2 tablespoons. The next thing I'm going to add is my chili seasoning, of course, my Chili-O. I'm going to be adding 3/8 cup of the chili seasoning. Now, of course, that's also equal to 6 tablespoons. So if you don't have the 1/8 cup, because I'm just going to do 3 of these 1/8 cup. And if you don't have 1/8 cup, you can go ahead and use 6 tablespoons. So there's 1, 2, I'm getting awfully full. And then the third 1/8 cup. I'm also going to add in a teaspoon of beef bouillon. You can use whatever beef bouillon you have that's granulated. So a teaspoon of the beef bouillon. And then finally, I'm just going to add in some salt, a half a teaspoon of salt. So now this jar is ready to go. Now, if you wanted to put this away for long-term storage, longer than a year or so, you could add an oxygen absorber to the top of it. Now, in hindsight, if I was thinking about that, I probably would have put the powders down a little bit further in the jar, just so that they wouldn't get stuck to the oxygen absorber at all. I don't know if they would, but that would be what I would do. And if you were going to be sealing this up for long-term storage, just make sure your rim is clean. I did get a little bit of powder on there because I took away my funnel. But you don't want to use something wet. You don't want to use something damp to wipe that, because you want to make sure no moisture gets into this jar. Now, if you were doing this for long-term storage, it's just as easy to make up a whole bunch of jars all at once as it is to make up one. So you can put out all your jars and all your ingredients, just scoop and dump, scoop and dump, scoop and dump, and you can make up 6, 10, a dozen jars in really hardly any more time than it takes to make up one. However, I do always recommend certainly that you try any recipe before you make them in bulk, just to make sure that your family likes it and it suits your family's tastes. And if there's any changes that you need to make, like maybe you want more or less salt or seasoning, or you want to leave an ingredient out or change an ingredient, you can test it that way. And when you have it set the way that your family likes it, then you can go ahead and make them in bulk. So our Wicked Good chili is ready to go on the shelf or in the pot. So now to fix up this chili and just show how quick and easy it is. I know people like to see how it looks when it's all cooked up. I am going to be using my emergency butane burner. I like to use this. Number one, it's easier to get a good camera angle, but number two, it just shows you this is the way that we typically would cook up a meal like this if we were in a grid down situation. And these meals are perfect for things like that, because you're going to want something quick, something easy, but something comforting and hearty, and you're probably not going to want to get into your refrigerator if your power's out to get hamburg or whatever else you might need for a dish like this. This pot is a little bit large for this chili, but it's going to work just fine. So we're just going to take off the lid and dump the chili into the pot. And I'm going to add 4 cups of water. Now, a good thing to remember, especially if you are making this in a tough situation, or say you give some of these to a college student or someone who doesn't have a lot of cooking utensils, your mason jar holds, your quart size mason jar holds 4 cups of water, and it also has graduated markings on the side, so you can measure different amounts of water. So that's a handy thing to remember. Now I'm just going to turn this burner right on, pretty high, because I'm just going to bring it right up to a boil. And I will start stirring this around. You can see that certain things float more than others when it's all dry, so you don't really see the beans because they're all down at the bottom, and the hamburg and the tomatoes and stuff are up at the top. But we know there's actually more beans in this than there is hamburg. So as this cooks, it's all going to start coming together, thickening up, and everything's going to become sort of even and spread throughout. I promise you, you're going to be impressed with how this changes and how this looks when it's done. So I'm just going to bring this up to a boil, and as soon as it boils, I'm going to turn it down and just let it simmer. I'm going to simmer it with the lid off. That's how I typically do my chili. It'll help it thicken and all of that. And just stir occasionally, and it's going to be about 10 to 15 minutes of simmering, and this will be done. Now, yes, it's true that a pot will boil faster and it will save you some energy if you have a lid on it, but simmering chili with the lid off also makes your house smell even better. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this, but it is starting to come up to a bubble. You don't actually need to let it boil in the beginning. Just once it starts getting to a little bit of a simmer, I'm going to turn it back down and just keep it at a slow simmer. All right, so it has been 10 minutes, so I am just going to take a little taste, because what we're looking for really is to see if the beans and the hamburg have softened. If they've completely softened, then this, is going to be done if this is as thick as you would like it. If they're not quite softened, then I'm going to let it go for another 5 minutes or so. I think this can go for another 5 minutes. Okay, so this chili is done. There is really a big thickness difference that happens between 10 minutes and 15 minutes. So I would say this needs about 15 minutes, but that's always going to depend. But look at how awesome this chili looks. You can see it through the steam. And I'm telling you, it smells amazing and it tastes amazing. Now, this might have been slightly more difficult than opening up a can of this, but this is going to be infinitely better. You're never going to get homemade chili taste out of a can, but you are going to get homemade chili out of a jar. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off and just let it cool a little bit before we serve it up. Okay, now we can serve this. You can see that this chili really, really thickens upon standing, which we really enjoy. We enjoy our chili really thick. If you don't like your chili quite so thick, you can always add more water, but this is how we really like it. The next chili that I'm going to make is going to be a cream cheese chicken chili. Now this is a family favorite of ours, and I just decided to adapt it into a jar meal. So once again, I'm going to be using a wide mouth quart size mason jar and my trusty canning funnel. And I'm going to be starting with chicken, some freeze-dried chicken. Now I am using these chicken slices. You can use any size of chicken that you like. When I make this recipe from scratch, I use a couple of chicken breasts and I shred them after they've cooked, so it will be shredded. So if you have chicken that you freeze-dried yourself, you can use any form of chicken. You could use diced or shredded or sliced. I'm using these slices for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's our favorite chicken, and so I have a lot of it, and we like the way it turns out in this chili. And the other reason is that it's on sale right now, and it's been on sale a lot lately, so I have a lot of it. So that's what I'm going to be using, but you can use any form of freeze-dried chicken that you want. Now the good thing about this chicken, it is the biggest pieces of the chicken that Thrive Life has, and you can always break it into smaller pieces. Freeze-dried chicken breaks very easily. All freeze-dried food breaks very easily, so if you needed smaller pieces, you could use this chicken and make it smaller, whereas you couldn't take a smaller chicken piece and make it larger. So that's another reason that I like this. But this chicken is super tasty. So that's 1 cup of the chicken slices. Next, I'm going to be using some instant black beans, and once again, make sure you're using instant beans. I'm going to be using 3/4 of a cup. So I've got a 1/2 cup here, and then a 1/4 cup. Now I think I will put the recipe for this dish done, normally. I'll make a recipe page for that and put it on our website with the other recipes. And I'm also going to be doing a meal in a bag version of this same recipe. We really like this recipe, if you can't tell. So keep an eye out for that as well. Next, I'm going to be using green chilies. These are freeze-dried green chilies, and I'm going to be using a 1/4 cup of these. And now I'm going to be putting in some of my powdered ingredients, because like I realized with the chili before, if you were going to be adding an oxygen absorber to this, I don't prefer to have my powdered ingredients right at the top. It's good to put your powdered ingredients not right on the bottom, because if you add them further up in the jar, they can sift down among the other ingredients and you can fit more in your jar. But sometimes I like to avoid putting them right at the very top as well. My first powdered ingredient is going to be some tomato powder. So I've got a teaspoon of tomato powder. I'm going to be using some chicken bouillon, and this time this is the Thrive Life chicken bouillon. This is actually a vegetarian chicken bouillon. Their beef bouillon is vegetarian too, but I have got other beef bouillons open that I need to use first, but I do prefer to use this, and I'll show you why. I'm using a 1/2 teaspoon of the chicken bouillon. If you take a look at the difference in the ingredient labels between the two brands, you'll probably see why I prefer to use the Thrive Life. It's just a little bit better ingredients, less ingredients, cleaner ingredients. The Knorr has the MSG in it and things like that. So I don't really dislike Knorr. I use a lot of their bouillons, but with the chicken and the beef, if I can use the Thrive Life, I prefer to. Those are the only bouillons they have, and the fact that they're vegetarian, so I can use them in dishes for my daughter as well, who likes to eat vegetarian, but they don't taste vegetarian. I mean, this tastes like chicken broth. It tastes really, really good. Next, I'm going to be using some ranch dressing mix. This is just the same as you would get in like the Hidden Valley packets, but you can buy it in bulk as well. I've bought the Hidden Valley in bulk, and I've bought this one at Save-A-Lot. So anywhere that you can get ranch dressing, the cheapest you can get it, you could use it right out of the packets if you want, measure it out of the packets, or buy it in bulk like this. And I'm using a tablespoon of the ranch dressing mix, tablespoon of that. I'm using some chili powder next. I'm going to be using a 1/2 tablespoon of chili powder. 1/2 tablespoon of chili powder. I'm going to be using some cumin, and I'm going to use a 1/2 teaspoon of this. So I'm actually going to measure this with my little dispenser, because this dispenses a 1/4 teaspoon at a time with each click. So I don't have to use a measuring spoon for this. I like to have all of my spices in this. Something like the chili powder, a 1/2 tablespoon, that's a lot of 1/4 teaspoons. So I also use the top and measure it with a spoon. And my next spice, you'll see I don't have in a container like this, because the container's being washed in between refilling. So, but I really prefer to use these, because this way I don't have to use all the measuring utensils. So I'm going to go ahead and give this 2 clicks, because that's going to be 1/2 teaspoon. Give it a little tap just to make sure that everything comes out of the little spot. And next, I'm going to be adding onion powder. This is one that I don't have in a little dispenser, because it's being washed. So a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder. And next, for the cream cheese part of the recipe, I'm going to be using some cream cheese powder. Now this powder gets a little bit clumpy, and I don't worry about it, because once it gets into the pot with the water and all that, it really just melts right in, just like the regular cream cheese. If you make this recipe the regular way with a block of cream cheese, it kind of gets clumpy as it melts, and then it just kind of blends right in. So I'm using a 1/2 cup of cream cheese powder. And then I'm going to be adding some tomato dices, diced tomatoes. I'm going to be using a half a cup of these as well. And then the final ingredient for this one is going to be corn. And I'm going to be adding 3/4 of a cup of corn. So I'm going to start with a half a cup and then add an additional 1/4 cup. And now our jar is full. There's not going to be any additional salt in this one. It's got plenty of salt, believe me, from that ranch dressing mix. So this does not need any additional salt. This one is ready to go. Like with the other chili, if you want to store this one for long-term storage, you can add an oxygen absorber right into the top of the jar. Lid on. And here is our beautiful cream cheese chicken chili. Preparing the cream cheese chicken chili is going to be basically the same process. And I'm also going to use my butane emergency burner. So I'm going to start by just opening the jar and adding it to the pot and adding the water. But this time I'm going to be using 3.5 cups of water. We do eat this chili a little bit soupier than the other one. One thing that I do really like about measuring the water in the jar, or even if I measure it in my measuring cup, I will pour it into the jar to add it to the pot, because that gets any extra powder out of the jar that might be stuck in the jar. So I'm just going to go ahead and stir this until it's moistened. It's okay to see the cream cheese powder clumping up a little bit, because as this heats, it'll kind of melt all together and make the sauce. It's the same thing that happens if you make this with fresh ingredients with the block of cream cheese. It's clumpy until the end when it all melts together. So this is pretty well moistened. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the heat and once again just bring this up to a simmer. And as this starts to simmer, I'm going to go ahead and turn it down a little bit so it can just maintain a good simmer while it's cooking and not boil the whole time. And I'm going to go ahead and set my timer for 15 minutes. I'm just going to go ahead and get a little taste test. That is perfect. So I'm just going to let this sit for just a minute and kind of cool down a little bit. This will thicken as it cools. And of course you can adjust water amounts, seasoning amounts, everything like that. And then we will serve this up as soon as it's had a couple of minutes to cool. Now we often serve this meal with some yellow rice and put yellow rice under it. And that of course can act as a meal stretcher. People always ask me how many servings you get out of a jar meal like this. With a quart-sized jar meal, I typically get anywhere from 3 to 5 servings. But there's a lot of things that depends on. Obviously, it depends on the appetites of the people that you're feeding and the type of dish that you made, but also what you're serving alongside of it. So if you add some meal stretchers like rice, you can put a dish over rice or serve it with rice. We put the yellow rice right underneath of this. If you serve it with salad or other things, cornbread is a great go along with chili. I do have a recipe for a Just Add Water cornbread mix, homemade, on the channel. I will link that video for you guys so you can see that. That would be a great thing to go along with any of these chilies. And that, of course, is going to stretch the meal and make it go further. Also, chips. We love to have Frito chips, on top of our chilies, or scoop some of these chilies up with tortilla chips. Things like that. So that's something to keep in mind if you need to serve more people or you just want to have a little bit more variety. But as this is cooling, you can see the beautiful chunks of chicken, the beans, the corn, everything has come together and made a really beautiful pot of chili, and this is delicious. Okay, let's serve it up. So the final version of chili that I'm going to make is going to be a vegetarian quinoa chili. And I'm making this with my daughter in mind because she is eating vegetarian now 100%. My middle daughter, she was kind of dabbling in that for a while, and now she's just not eating anything with meat. So I thought it would be nice to have a version of chili that she can have. And since I'm doing this with her in mind, I'm doing 2 different variations of this. I'm going to make a full-size one in a wide mouth quart jar, but I'm also going to make a single-sized variation in this pint jar. This is a wide mouth pint, and this is going to be 1/4 of this recipe. So this is not going to fill this jar entirely, but what it's going to allow us to do is have room to add the water into the jar with the ingredients, so it can all be cooked right inside of this jar if we choose to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and make up both of these jars right now. And the first ingredient that I'm going to be using is some beef TVP. Now, TVP stands for texturized vegetable protein, so it's just like a vegetarian meat substitute. It's basically like a dehydrated crumble, and it does soak up water quite a bit. And this is going to be replacing any meat that could have been in the recipe. I'm going to be putting a tablespoon into the small jar. I am going to use my canning funnel in the larger jar. I don't think I need it in the smaller jar. And then I'm going to be using 1/4 of a cup in the larger jar. And TVP can actually be a good substitute for meat. Even if you're not a vegetarian, you can use this. It can sometimes be a less expensive option, especially if you're talking about something like freeze-dried meats that would go into jar meals like this. And a lot of the time it's actually used as a kind of a meat extender or a meat stretcher commercially. They might add some TVP in with some ground beef in a recipe or a product to kind of stretch that meat because it's a less expensive option. And next, of course, this is a quinoa chili. So I'm going to go ahead and add the quinoa. Now this is actually instant quinoa, which is basically along the lines of instant rice, like minute rice, or instant beans like we've been using in the chili. So this has been cooked and dehydrated. So I purchased this and I did get it from Amazon. Thrive Life used to sell an instant quinoa and they discontinued it. So I searched and found it on Amazon because I really wanted to have this as an option. This, of course, you could make yourself, just like you could make instant rice or instant beans. You could just cook it and dehydrate it, quinoa. But for myself right now, it was easiest for me to purchase some already done. Now, quinoa is a very healthy option. It's packed with a lot of protein. It's probably one of the highest protein grains that there is. And it's also a complete protein, which is actually pretty rare in plant-based proteins. It's got a lot of iron and magnesium and actually a lot of fiber also, so it is a very healthy option. Now it also cooks fairly quickly, which makes it really good for preparedness, even when it's not the instant type. If you wanted to substitute in regular quinoa, you would just have to experiment a little bit because I've only done this recipe with the instant quinoa, and usually instant items are a little bit larger maybe than the raw grain. And they need a different amount of cooking time and a different amount of water and then a different measurement of the grain in your recipe. So if you wanted to play around with that, you could. I just haven't done that yet. I know everything else cooks really quickly, so I wanted to have a quick cooking grain in here. So for my small jar, I'm going to be putting in 1/4 cup of the quinoa. And then for my larger jar, I'm going to be adding a cup. And next, I'm going to be adding some instant black beans to this. I'm going to use 2 types of beans in this chili just to give it some variation, so I'm not going to use a whole lot of either kind. So I'm going to use black beans and red beans. And in the small jar, I'm going to put 2 tablespoons of each, which of course is 1/8 of a cup. And then in the larger jar, I'm going to put 1/2 cup of each. So there's our black beans in the small jar and in the large jar. And I'm going to do the same with the instant red beans. 2 tablespoons and 1/2 cup. Next, I'm going to add some corn to this one. I'm going to go ahead and do 2 tablespoons in the small jar and 1/2 cup in the large jar. Next, I'm going to use some tomato powder. It's going to be 1 tablespoon in the small jar and 1/4 cup in the large jar. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the chili seasoning, and this is the Chili-O again. I'm going to use 1 tablespoon in the small jar and 1/4 cup in my large jar. Next, tomato dices, 2 tablespoons in the small jar and 1/4 cup in the large jar. It's getting pretty full. And next, I'm going to add a little bit of jalapeno to this one. This does give it a little bit of heat, so if it's something that you don't like heat at all, then you could skip this or you could cut it down. I've been using the dehydrated ones, but you could also use freeze-dried. You might want to use a little more of freeze-dried, a little less of dehydrated just because of the nature of the products. But this is a spicy pepper, so you could leave this out entirely if you didn't want this. Likewise, if you like it spicy, you can add more. And these could be added to any of the other chili recipes if you wanted to give them more heat, as could red pepper flakes, cayenne powder, anything like that. So in the small jar, I'm just going to add 1 teaspoon because we don't want it to be too spicy. And then in the big jar, I'm just going to go ahead and use 1 tablespoon. It's a little bit, it's not exactly 4 times the teaspoon, but it's going to be just fine. Then for the final couple of ingredients in this chili, I'm going to be putting some of the diced green chilies. Now this chili is not very spicy at all. This is a very mild chili. It's like the canned green chilies that you buy in the Hispanic food section of the grocery store. So these you don't have to worry too much about them unless you're super, super sensitive. I'm going to put 1 tablespoon of these in the small jar, and then 1/4 cup of them in the large jar. And then finally, I'm going to add some of the mixed bell pepper. I'm going to use 1/2 tablespoon in the small jar and 2 tablespoons in the large jar. Now you can see that this just fits. There is room for an oxygen absorber in this if you wanted to put it away for a longer term. This one has a lot of space left in that so that we can add the water right to the jar. Now, if you knew you weren't going to want to prepare this in the jar, you could always use one of these 1/2 pint jars. That's just half the size of this one, and it should fit just about perfectly. Go ahead and add a lid. And here is our vegetarian quinoa chili. I am going to use something a little bit different to cook up the individual serving of vegetarian chili. This is the Presto Nomad food warmer. I have had this for a few years, but I think it's still available. If it is, if I can find it, I will link it down in the description box. This is kind of like a little slow cooker, an individual size slow cooker that works with wide mouth pint-sized mason jars like this one. It actually came with its own jar and its own lid, but you can use any jar that size that you have. So it does have a compartment here on the lid. So if you wanted to put some little condiment packets, salt and pepper, you know, a packet of crackers, anything you wanted to go with your meal. And then it does have a handle as well, so it's kind of portable. I think the idea is people could use this to take to the office or take to school or whatever. And it does, the lid comes off. And then you would just put the jar in here. Now you do keep the flat on the jar when you cook it or heat it, but you don't use the ring. Now, cooking and heating, the instructions say this is not for cooking food. They say it's just for heating food. So I think the basic idea with this is that you would put some leftovers or a serving of, you know, something in your jar and you would heat it at your location. But because these jar meals cook up so quickly and so easily and they are just, you know, ready to go, this works perfectly fine for cooking this chili. It works just fine. So you just put the jar in, you put the flat on, and then you put the lid back on, and then you plug this in. Now this does have a spot for the cord to tuck in so that, you know, you can wrap it all the way around so that it's out of the way when you're carrying it. But you just plug this in and then the light goes on and then it's going. It doesn't have an on-off switch or anything. Just plug it and unplug it. But this is super handy. I really like this. In fact, I'm thinking about getting another one for my daughter to take out to the barn with her so that she has one for heating her meals like this. So all I'm going to do to get this meal going is I'm just going to remove the lid. And I'm going to place this right in here before I add the water. And I'm going to go ahead and add 1 1/4 cups of water to this jar. Now this does end up making a pretty thick chili, but we like it that way. So as this is cooking, you could always add more water, or when it was finished if you didn't want it quite so thick. It's not going to look very thick right now. I'm just going to mix this all together till everything's blended. It's not going to look very thick right now because obviously these ingredients are going to soak up this water as it cooks and heats. So just give it a good stir and get everything well blended. And then like I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and put the flat back on, but I'm not going to put the ring on it. Then I'm going to add the lid to the cooker back on. And I'm going to go ahead and plug this in, and then in a couple of hours we're going to have our chili all ready to eat. All right, now this is done. I don't even think it's been going for 2 hours, but it's definitely done. And I didn't even stir it halfway through or partway through, which I usually do try to do, but it's all done just the same. Because I fixed the small jar of the vegetarian chili, I'm not going to fix this one up because you saw how it comes out, but you would just be the same as the other large jars of chili. Just put it in the pot with the water, and this would be 5 cups of water for this one, because we're multiplying the small batch by 4. And like any of the other chilies, you know, if you want it a little bit less thick, you can add more water. And if you want it thicker, you can add less water. You just have to make sure that you have enough for all your ingredients to become tender. Okay guys, now you have 3 new meal in a jar recipes to add to your repertoire and your prepper pantry. I hope that you and your family enjoy these as much as we do. We will have some printable recipe pages for each of these recipes on our website, and I'll link that down in the description box below the video. It's just a picture that you can save to your phone or your computer, and you can either access it from there or you can print it out to use it. And we do have a version with a picture and a version without a picture. I'll also put links to the harder to find food items down in the description box. If you don't do your own freeze drying and dehydrating, you can still make these meals. If you happen to be watching this within the first couple days after the video is released, then you're in luck because Thrive Life is having their big back to school sale right now, and they do have several of these items on sale. I know the chicken slices, the ground beef, the chopped onions, the corn is on sale. A lot of these items are on sale. If you want to check that out, I will put the link down in the description box as well. Make sure that you use that link to stay tied to us. And if the sale has ended, don't worry about it because they always have new specials every month. They have 3 big sales throughout the year, and they do put out random various flash sales and coupon codes throughout the year. So if you don't want to miss out on that, you can join our text alert service. Just text SALE to the number that I'll put at the bottom of the screen, and I'll also put that in the description box as well. And you'll get on our list, and we will send you a text message anytime there's a new sale or a coupon or anything like that. You can also get information on becoming a consultant, because one of the consultant perks is shopping these big sales a day early. Some of you who have been following along know how important that became this time. So if you'd like some information on that, you can text EARN to that same number. You could also turn it into a business and earn some extra income and some free food if you know other people like yourself who are interested in building their food storage or doing jar meals and things like that. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a chili pepper emoji down in the comments to let me know. And I will put that video for my Just Add Water cornbread mix in a jar right up here for you to watch next. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.